Welcome to the Creative Penn podcast. I'm Joanna Penn, thriller author and creative entrepreneur, bringing you interviews, inspiration and information on writing craft and creative business. You can find the episode show notes, your free author blueprint and lots more at thecreativepenn.com, and that's Penn with a double N. And here's the show. Hello creatives, I'm Joanna Penn. And this is episode number 773 of the podcast, and it is Saturday, the 28th of September 2024 as I record this. In today's show, I'm talking about writing humour into our books with Dave Cohen. And it's not just about fiction, it's also about nonfiction, just generally bringing in some laughter or some giggles. Also, we did talk about the book under one name, but Dave changed the name of the book after our interview, and it is now called How to Funny Up Your Fiction, Bring light, shade and laughs to your novel. But I think a lot of the tips are also for non-fiction as well. So that's coming up in the interview section. In writing and publishing things, the Author Nation podcast has an interview with Ernest Dempsey on how to keep a career fresh over multiple books and over many years. Ernie is a prolific thriller author who has also got some action-adventure series like My Arcane Thrillers. And he talks about why he decided to switch from writing archaeological thrillers to a golf novel. He was drawn to the story and felt it was important to write even though it was outside his usual genre. He said, "Is book 24 of the Sean Wyatt series going to break through? Is that going to be an award winner? Probably not. I wanted to do some real art, something like a Sistine Chapel, something that would stand the test of time." And I think this is really interesting, and it's a topic I'm going to come back to very soon in my show that I do with Orna Ross, the Alliance of Independent Authors, the self-publishing advice show, is some of these rules we have around series, like long series. But as Ernie says here, and this is one of the reasons I'm doing more standalones, is you can be more artistic in inverted commas with standalones. You can be much more experimental because the whole promise of a series is that each book in a series delivers the same impact and the same emotional promise, and it will have certain rules and all of that. And there's lots of benefits in series, but there are lots of benefits in standalones. It's also easier to submit standalones to competitions and awards. It's easier to pitch to agents, traditional publishing, easier to pitch for movies and TV. Lots of reasons why standalones are good. But there's this kind of rule in inverted commas in the indie world that series are what we all have to do. But I'm definitely with Ernie here. It's not all about writing series. But of course, the more books you have, the more you can play around. And there's a lot more in the interview on the Author Nation podcast, wherever you're listening to this. Draft to Digital shares a video this week on the best practices of successful indie authors. It's a great discussion and includes some of the tips. Don't go into debt to self-publish your book. Work with whatever budget you have and think creatively about getting things done inexpensively, especially at the start. I think that's super important. I've, for the first 5 years of my career as an indie, I funded it from my day job in the same way that you would fund any kind of hobby at the beginning and not expect to make money. Self-funding your business off your other income is important. And then, yes, eventually it could end up paying its own way if you do all the business stuff that we talk about. But yeah, don't go into debt for self-publishing. But do invest in professional editing and cover design. And I still work with editors. I still work with Jane, my designer, even though I do a lot of images myself now with Midjourney, and then she turns them into a finished cover. Another tip, remember that it's not about you, it's about them, the readers. And this shift in perspective can help you overcome fear and anxiety, because when someone's reading a book, they're not thinking about you, the author. They're thinking about the story or the lessons learned for themselves. It is about them. And you do have to shift your brain at some point. I think about it sort of switching heads from the author, artist, me side of things to the person who's listening, the person who's reading. What can I do to make this the best for them? There are lots of other tips, but I like done is better than perfect. Don't let perfectionism get in the way of publishing your work. There will always be something to improve upon, but it's important to get your work out there. You can always release updated versions of your book later on. And of course, my first novel, the first couple of nonfiction books I withdrew. They are not available anymore. And then because things changed over time, they were on the early days of self-publishing. My first novel, which was Pentecost by Joanna Penn. Later, I rewrote it. It became Stone of Fire by J.F. Penn. And then I rewrote that again in, 2022. And so, you can re-release updated versions over time as you go, or new editions. For example, How to Make a Living with Your Writing is on the 3rd edition. So there's lots of my books in different editions. So don't be afraid to put a book out there. It will never be done. It will never be perfect. Try your best and then move on to the next project. Also, be consistent with your branding. This is something to get right early on. If you look at my series, if you look at either my nonfiction or my fiction, the things that are within a series look the same, and then the different series look different. But on my fiction, my name looks the same and all of that. So one of the things I'm not good at the moment is changing my author photo. I need to get some new ones. It's funny because the tips say use the same author photo. But of course, when you've been around as long as we have, what actually annoys me is people who don't change their photo. You'll see some people who haven't changed their photo in like 20 years, but I think it's important to update that. And finally, don't give up. It's easy to get discouraged in the face of setbacks, but it's important to remember that success takes time and perseverance. Yes, the longer I am in this, the more I notice that the people who are successful have been around a long time. So yes, perseverance. And in AI this week, last week I mentioned the deal between Lionsgate and Runway to train a custom video model on Lionsgate's movies and shows. This week, James Cameron, director of Titanic, Avatar, and yes, Terminator, has joined the board of Stability AI, which has the Stable Diffusion model. And the CEO of Stable Diffusion used to work at Weta Digital on special effects. So this all makes sense, really. And the Hollywood Reporter article quotes Cameron as saying, "I spent my career seeking out emerging technologies that push the very boundaries of what's possible, all in the service of telling incredible stories. I was at the forefront of CGI over 3 decades ago, and I've stayed on the cutting edge since. Now, the intersection of generative AI and CGI image creation is the next wave. The convergence of these two totally different engines of creation will unlock new ways for artists to tell stories in ways we could have never imagined. Stability AI is poised to lead this transformation." So yes, unlock new ways for artists to tell stories. This is exactly how I feel about AI, as I always say. If you have curiosity and imagination and bigger dreams and stories in your mind than you can possibly express alone, you will get this feeling, this excitement that, oh my goodness, you always thought you might die with all of this inside you, and now the potential for it to come out is so much bigger. That's how I feel about this. It is indeed unlocking me in new ways every single week. Very exciting times. And in fact, there has been an unlock this week. Talk about unlocking new ways of working. It seems like everyone is talking about and loving Google Notebook LM this week. It's at notebooklm.google.com. It is free. It can take up to, I think it is 20 million words in the context window, which is like the short-term memory. So it doesn't technically store it. It uses it in short-term memory, which is about 40 books. So if you have a series that is under 40 books, it can all go in this one notebook. You have these different notebooks. It's like a big folder. And then it can do loads of things with that material, with that source material. It can generate a very realistic podcast conversation about it, which I will share a little in a minute. It can make frequently asked questions, study guides, reader questions. It can do a timeline. I haven't played with this yet, but I've heard that people are finding a timeline very useful for series. You can use it as a series Bible. You can chat with the material. It can do lessons learned. You can put in a YouTube link and it will give you top takeaways. So in fact, the takeaways I gave you from the Draft to Digital video there, that is from, I put a video in there. There was no transcript, so I did that with Notebook. Super, super useful, so I don't have to watch an hour's worth of video. to find you some key points. I made a character list across my whole series with bits about each character. There are so many use cases, and this seems like the most enthusiastic reception for an AI tool since ChatGPT launching. It is gone viral in how useful it is, and I shared some use cases with my patrons this week, and the audio generation is very interesting because it's so natural. So I want you to think about this in two ways. One, the Notebook LM in itself is so useful. But secondly, the quality of the audio discussion is supernatural. And we haven't really seen this yet. This is the first time this has really been available. I'm going to play a minute of the discussion here. The source material are my 3 Brooke and Daniel crime thriller books. So it is a trilogy set in London. Here's a minute of the podcast discussion. So essentially, I put the books into LM. You click a button, which is like generate audio, and it came up with 9 minutes. I'm not going to share 9 minutes. I'll put the link to the whole 9 minutes in the show notes if you want to listen to it. But here is a little bit of that discussion.
What I find so captivating about Penn's work is how she uses actual locations. Borough Market, the Hunterian Museum, Crossbones Graveyard, but they become more than just backdrops,
Oh, I see what you mean.
They become almost symbolic, these places.
Yeah.
They're layered with history, almost like characters themselves.
It's so true. Like when you think about Borough Market, right? So full of life, so vibrant.
Right.
And then you juxtapose that with the descriptions of like desperation that we see in Deviants.
Yeah.
It creates this stark contrast, this feeling that there's this hidden darkness just simmering beneath the surface of these really iconic places.
Precisely. And that unsettling juxtaposition appears again with the Hunterian Museum in Desecration.
Oh, interesting.
This place, dedicated to preserving life through anatomical specimens, becomes the setting for a murder. The contrast is jarring. It forces us to confront the unsettling proximity of life and death, preservation and violence, all within these very walls.
It's true. And that unsettling feeling, it intensifies when you start to notice how often Penn uses body modification as a motif.
Oh, absolutely.
Tattoos and Deviants, obviously the anatomical specimens, even that taxidermy artist Blake encounters.
Right.
So what did you think about that? The first time you hear it, you're like, okay, this is crazy. They're actually having a conversation. It's really, really interesting. And if you listen to the Hard Fork podcast, there is an interview with one of the researchers who was also a writer who was part of making this tool. And they talk about a lot of use cases as well. But for example, people are making custom podcasts for themselves. So in the morning or in the night before they do a commute, they're putting in all the meeting notes, research papers, lectures, background notes on things and creating a custom podcast to listen to on the way to work or to college or whatever, because listening to 2 voices discussing things is so much more engaging than a straight read. And this is just part of humanity, right? We have spent, millennia talking to each other in order to learn things, as opposed to reading straight text or listening to a lecture. We have talked about things. People are using it to explain hard concepts to their kids for school. So yeah, I will put the link to the whole 9 minutes if you want to carry on or go play with it yourself. As ever, please read the terms and conditions before you upload your work. notebooklm.google.com. It is a lot of fun to play around with, that is for sure. In personal news, we are finally here. The Kickstarter for Blood Vintage launches 1st of October 2024, tomorrow, as this goes out, and runs until 15th of October 2024. Even if you don't want the book, you might want to have a look at the campaign page at jfpenn.com/bloodvintage. This is my 4th campaign now, and I can tell you that I feel a lot better about it than I did at the beginning. If you remember, I was absolutely petrified and very worried when I started out, but by number 4, I actually feel like, do you know what? I know what I'm doing now. Or at least I know what I'm doing. I know what buttons to press and how to make a campaign and all that. If you're listening in the future, you can check out the Kickstarter to see how it did. I have been doing videos, preparing social media and emails and everything, but I did take myself off for an artist's date this week to Ely, a 1,000-year-old Gothic cathedral on the other side of the country. Pictures on Instagram at jfpennauthor. And I will do a longer blog post about it on booksandtravel.page soon. There are lots of posts there about my book research. So I am in launch mode. This is finishing energy. And if you haven't heard my theory on this before, we need starting energy to get started, pushing through energy to do the hard parts and the grind to get the book done. Finishing energy is what gets the book into the world. Editing, publishing, launching, marketing. And so if you're struggling with your books, consider whether it's starting energy, pushing through energy, or finishing energy that you're having an issue with, because there are different ways to deal with different parts of that. Consider where you are in the process. But yes, the finish push is just as hard as the other bits. The Kickstarter is just for the first edition hardback with silver foil, sprayed edges, the ribbon, etc. If you go to the Kickstarter, you can watch the video where I show you. None of the other formats are available. There is no ebook, there is no paperback, there is no audiobook, because it is out on submission to traditional publishers, and as I record this, we have had 5 requests for the full manuscript in the first week. So fingers crossed, something might even happen. The plan is to get a deal, but if not, I will be self-publishing the rest of the formats before the end of 2024. So this could be a very special edition indeed, depending on what happens with it. Check it out at jfpenn.com/bloodvintage. So thanks for your emails and comments and photos this week. There were tons of comments about Mark Leslie Lefebvre's discussion on in-person sales. I'll just share a couple of them. John said he had his own in-person experience. He went to a book fair that landed him a book signing gig at the bookstore in the airport in town. And he said what had to be in place for it to happen. He was there at the first event. He made the effort to go, meet people, interact, get out from behind the table. He had a professional cover and the books were available to order on Ingram. And this is really important because you can sell in person, but if someone wants your books in a bookstore, you have to be on Ingram, which you can do through Ingram Spark. Plus, he said on using a Square reader, he did start by feeling a bit worried about it, but he overcame those fears and loved the convenience of the tool. He has a test product on the Square inventory that costs 5 cents, and he tests it every time at the beginning of any live selling event. So great tips there, and sent me a photo of the book events. Looked brilliant. And on YouTube, Caring for Elderly Parents said, "Thanks for sharing this from Mark. Glad to hear I'm not the only one who sold more books at physical events than I do online. I do all summer live events, including farmers markets. The experience, the chance to chat with people about my books and other books is a reassurance that people are interested in the themes I write about." I think that's great. You're getting some real feedback on your work. And then, one more. Robert left a comment. "Because of my membership in the Cat Writers Association, which I did not know about, I must write a cat book so I can use that. I've been given the opportunity to sell my protectives, like detectives but pet, cat mysteries at a table at the Cat Fanciers Association Cat Show and Expo in Cleveland. I've done author events and holiday markets, but never anything like a cat show." This is great. This is exactly what we were talking about by the book adjacent events are probably better than book events, because at a book adjacent event like a cat show, book people are just going to come over to you and have a look, whereas in a book fair or something there'll be lots of other books. But yeah, fascinating. And then thanks to pictures this week, Catherine sent a picture from an amazing bookstore in Dujiangyang in China with this just gorgeous architecture, books on every surface, up the walls. Looks amazing. Janet sent me a video of lots of skulls from a bone house in Bavaria, very gothic. And Christine sent me a picture of a cemetery in Salzburg, the setting for the escape scene in Sound of Music. So thank you for all of that. Please leave a comment on the podcast show notes at thecreativepenn.com or on the YouTube channel or Spotify or wherever you like, or message me on X at thecreativepenn. Email me, send me pictures of where you're listening, or let me know what you think about Google Notebook LM. Joanna at thecreativepenn.com. I love to hear from you. It makes this more of a conversation. So today's show is sponsored by Publisher Rocket, which helps you with keyword and category research on Amazon, which you need for your metadata when self-publishing, as well as generating lists of keywords for your Amazon ads. You can do this manually on Amazon, but it takes a lot more time and you have to think of all the different permutations to search for. I found that Publisher Rocket saves me so much time and frustration that I use it for every book in every genre that I publish on Amazon. It makes the process easy, which, let's face it, is what we need so we can get back to writing. You can use it to find keywords that readers actually type into Amazon search. You can also learn about other authors' sales with the competitor analysis, which I often use to find categories I want my books to appear in. Plus, you can discover best-selling book categories and niche categories, which you can use to write to market if that's your thing, and you can find profitable keywords for Amazon ads and easily export them. You can also search separately for the US, UK, and German stores, as well as for ebooks, audiobooks, or print books, and in English or German. Publisher Rocket is constantly adding new features and capabilities, and it is a free upgrade once you own the tool. The latest update is the reverse ASIN, which makes finding excellent keywords incredibly simple. Enter a book's ASIN, so that is the alphanumeric code that identifies the book on Amazon. And this is not your book, this will be your competitor's book. And Rocket will tell you all the keywords that book has ranked for. No more hunting and guessing. You can quickly see what keywords actually help other similar books make sales on Amazon. Super useful and quick, so you can get back to writing. It's a one-time payment, it's very reasonably priced, and you get 30 days money-back guarantee. You can start researching keywords, categories, and competition right away. There are handy tutorials, but to be fair, it's pretty intuitive to use. Publisher Rocket is one of my must-use tools as part of my publishing process. I have been using it for years. It is very useful. So go check it out at publisherrocket.com. That's publisherrocket.com. So this type of corporate sponsorship pays for the hosting, transcription and editing, but my time in creating the show is sponsored by my community at patreon.com/thecreativepenn. Now, there was a real flurry this week thanks to the 27 new patrons who have joined us. I think it was my use cases for Google Notebook LLM which got shared around the community. So I hope all the tutorials and things are useful to you if you're new. And thanks to everyone who's been supporting for months and years. If you join the community, you get access to everything, all the backlist videos, audio topics on AI, mindset, business, publishing, writing, craft, and my patron-only Q&A solo episodes, which are like a whole nother podcast where I answer patron questions. And the latest of those went out over the weekend. The Patreon is a monthly subscription, the equivalent of buying me a black coffee a month or a couple of coffees if you're feeling generous. You get access to it all. If you get value from the show and you want more, come on over and join us. Patreon.com, patreon.com/thecreativepenn. And make sure you use the website to join rather than the app on Apple, as they add 30%. So just go to the website, patreon.com/thecreativepenn. Right, let's get into the interview. Dave Cohen is a multi-award-winning BBC comedy writer who has worked on shows like Horrible Histories, as well as a comedy novelist, podcaster and author of nonfiction. His latest book is How to Write a Funny Novel. So welcome to the show, Dave.
Hi, thanks very much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Oh no, I'm excited to talk to you today. But first up, tell us a bit more about you and how you got into books and self-publishing after focusing more on writing for screen and performance in previous decades.
Well, I'd always wanted to be a novelist, really, since I was a teenager, but I got a little bit distracted on the way and happened to spend 10 years as a stand-up comedian, and that was followed by about 20 years of writing for comedy for TV and radio. And now was never quite the right time to start that novel writing career. But I got to my 59th birthday. This was in 2017. And I finally thought, well, this is the time that I decide I have to write the novel now. I have to do it now and be damned. So I did, and I wrote my first novel. I was very pleased, and I got it all ready to send off to agents, and finished it ready March 2020. At which point, COVID happened, and every one of my comedy friends and colleagues, stand-up comedians, writers, all of the people who are far more successful than me were suddenly out of work. And they had to think, what am I going to do next? Oh, I'll write a book. So I suddenly thought, right, my book isn't going to get anywhere with an agent. I might as well self-publish. And that's the next part of the journey, and that's how I've ended up here now.
We'll just go into that a bit more then, because obviously working a couple of decades with the BBC, which if people don't know, is a lot of people in America, is probably the most traditional of traditional media you could possibly imagine. So how did you break out of the opinions, I think, of the traditional media around self-publishing? I mean, things have obviously changed since I self-published back in sort of 2007, but how did you get around that?
Well, I mean, first of all, I would say people think of the BBC as this sort of very respectable giant monolith, but actually it's loads and loads of different quirky little places. And so it sounds great to say writing for the BBC, but a lot of that was writing for BBC Radio, which was about sort of 5 people in a broom cupboard. And also children's TV, which is only 3 people in a smaller cupboard. And so it's actually that there's the kind of pioneering way of the BBC is able to make things despite this sort of reputation as this very fusty corporation rather than because of it. And I think that's very much the kind of spirit that I found fairly straightforwardly, actually. That's one of the things that was sort of fairly easy to come to from being in the sort of world of TV writing, was moving away from the BBC, just full of people who just do it and do it for love. And so from that point of view, it was a fairly straightforward move. But I think that the harder move was coming from being somebody who was a professional writer and was used to a kind of a process that often ended up in rejection, but it was still a process anyway. So moving from that to a situation that the sort of the jungle, I suppose, of self-publishing, where it's free for all.
Yeah, and there are obviously pros and cons in that. I mean, you mentioned your previous writing, and one of the things you say in the book is that much of it was quite short, lyrics and shorter things. So what were the challenges in the craft did you have in writing a full novel after very different creativity in the past?
Well, this probably sounds quite stupid, but it's actually true. The number of words is quite a sort of challenge, because a single joke can be 4 words long. There's a great comedian, Tim Vine, a British comedian, and he had a joke which went, Velcro, what a rip-off. And that's a joke he did that's 4 words long.
It's quite good.
So the idea is, what do I do? Do I have to write 20,000 4-word jokes? But even obviously the numbers thing is part of the issue. Like a half-hour sitcom is about 4,000 words long, and that's to kind of develop a new idea for a sitcom and to write a pilot script for one is quite a lot of work. It's almost not quite as much work as developing a whole novel, but it's months of playing with stuff and thinking of things. And so the words was the first thing, but then the next problem was going to the other extreme, was like, I can write as much as I want now. And so you'd end up overwriting, and, the sky wasn't just blue, it was a pastel blue with the clouds breezing along, and they go, I can just do this. Whereas when you're writing a script, you just have to get straight to the point. Character knocks on door, other character answers straight into conversation. So yes, one of the main things was overcompensating. But that did lead me to another true fact, I think, of whatever you're writing in, whatever form you're writing in, whether it's screenplays, novels, books, jokes, whatever, you have to keep cutting all the time. Cut. You can always overwrite, and you always need to get to the point. And I think just one other thing, the main other thing that I learned, I suppose, was you don't actually have to be funny all the time when you're writing a novel. I think that would just be too much to be like banging the reader over the head with a plastic mallet.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, well, that's interesting. Well, let's come back to the comedy then. So why is comedy so important for writers anyway? I mean, I write darker books, and some people tell me that they laugh in my books, and I certainly didn't intend it, or specifically funny books more like yours. So why is laughter so important?
Well, I mean, because the Bible tells us it is. You know the phrase, laughter is the best medicine? Do you know where that's from?
It's got to be from Proverbs or something.
That's correct. Yes. With your background in theology, I thought you might get that. Yes, it's from Proverbs. Yeah, laughter is the best medicine, and people love laughter. I grew up always loving comedy, listening to comedy on the radio, but also just the great thing was the whole family. We would all sit around the TV, and there were some great TV shows in Britain in the 1970s, and we'd all sit around and watch Dad's Army and Reggie Perrin and Morecambe and Wise. And comedy is it's just lovely. It brings people together, really.
It's difficult though, isn't it? Because, I mean, you talk there about sitting around together. I think maybe it's partly my family. But my brother is very funny and laughs a lot, and I laugh with him. But when we were kids, I would just be like, I don't even know why he's finding this funny. This is ridiculous. And people have different views of what is funny, right? And so how do we write a novel where you don't really have the delivery timing that you would in stand-up? You know, in stand-up, you're reacting to the crowd and you can do all that a bit like when I'm speaking professionally, I can see how things are landing. But with a novel or with a short story or whatever, you can't see the audience reaction. So how are you dealing with this sort of individual sense of humour, broader appeal when you're writing a novel?
Well, the first thing, just before I answer that specific question, I would like to say this book that I've written now, How to Write a Novel, which is, it's partly for me as much, how to write a funny novel, it's as much for me to learn by writing that down. But the first thing that became very clear to me was I needed to distinguish between what we might call a funny novel, like, say, the Bridget Jones books or P.G. Wodehouse. Those are just funny novels that you sit and you laugh and you read them in a half a day or whatever. But then there are also books that are written in genre, and you add humor to them. So you might think of something like, say, the Richard Osman murder mystery books, and these are great books, but they're funny as well. Sophie Kinsella writes romance, but those books are very funny. So there are two types of comedy in that sense. There is that's writing as a style, say, and writing as a genre. But I think for you as a writer to find your funny, going for another old proverb, sorry to go even further back, but we're with Socrates now. And Socrates said, know thyself. That's one of the key elements, I think, to what makes, when you come across a funny character, one of the key elements is they lack self-awareness. And if you want to write a funny character, you're going to need awareness of your own weaknesses and foibles. And I know in drama, and I know you've written a book about this, about discovering yourself and finding your dark side. In comedy, it's not, you don't quite need to go that far, but you need to find what I call cringe corner. You need to find those elements about yourself, like how do you react to certain people? What irritates you? Why, when you're standing in the queue in the post office and the woman in front of you is taking 20 minutes to buy a stamp, why are you getting so angry? Or what is it about you that's what's the flaw in your character that's making you do this? I mean, I've got an example in How to Write a Funny Novel of a thing that happened to me in 1982. So this is going back to my early 20s, and I was involved in setting up a music festival, and I was handing out checks to people, not knowing that these checks were going to bounce the next day, and I was potentially going to get into big trouble for this and go to jail possibly. But luckily a couple of rock stars paid off the money, and the losses that the festival made were paid. But after that time, I got very angry with the people who put me in that position, and I held this grudge. And I realized in 2022, 40 years later, I was still holding a grudge against these people from 1982. And I was thinking about it. What was the point of that? What good was that doing anybody? I mean, was it certainly not me? You know, I was arguing with this guy in my head, and he wasn't there to answer. He was just in my head. And I realized that this is just the most ridiculous thing, that I'm holding on to this grudge. And it actually became a very useful thing for me, not that particular story, but it became a useful thing for the second novel in my series, Barry Goldman, which is very loosely autobiographical. And I was able to bring all of the anger, 40 years of realization, well, I was able to kind of put that into the book, and it helped the character, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting, that kind of situational thing. And you mentioned Richard Osman. I eventually picked up the Thursday Murder Club or whatever it's called. And because I was like, oh, it's so popular because he's famous, right? In the UK, he's a famous guy and it can't be good. And then I just chortled my way through the whole thing. And then I've read all of them, pre-ordered them. I love that series. And you're right about the sort of ridiculousness, because his main narrator, that they're in a retirement home, and his main narrator is just so funny because she's talking about what's going on and gossiping, and it's all funny, even though she's not trying to be. And you just think, oh, that's just getting into that character. And I mean, you mentioned there your Barry Goldman book. So how do we construct a character that readers will find funny, even though that character is not standing around telling jokes?
I think writing comedy, adding funny to a novel or writing a funny novel, is not a very different process from writing any other type of novel. If you think about what you need when you're starting to come up with an idea for a novel, and it's the same as what you need for anything, a drama, a movie or whatever, you've got these four principal elements that everybody has. You have a character, or two characters possibly. The character has a goal, and that's the second thing. And then there are obstacles in the way of that goal. And then the fourth thing is the world that these people inhabit. And that's every single story ever written. 99.99% anyway of stories, they are that. A character goes on a journey, they've got a goal, and then they meet these obstacles, they fight them, they slay the dragon, whatever. So you start at that very general place, and there's just two crucial differences with a comedy character in that situation, which is they go on the same journey, and they've got the goals and they've got the obstacles. The two differences are when you get to the end of a drama, your character has, they've been through hell, they've slain the dragon, whatever, they've saved the world, but they've also learnt something along the way. They've had, that lovely Greek word, catharsis. They're a different person at the end compared to the beginning. In comedy, that doesn't happen. I mean, especially in sitcom, a character just comes back week in, week out to make the same mistakes, because comedy characters never learn. And it's true in novels as well, that even when they get to the end and they've solved the problem, they've got the girl or whatever, they still haven't changed. So that's number one. The second thing, which is really the most crucial difference between characters in drama and comedy, is that in drama, we often talk about, there's the protagonist is the main character and the antagonist is the enemy character. More often than not, most times in comedy, the antagonist is the same person. So the obstacles are your obstacles, the flaws in your character which have come due to this lack of self-awareness. So the biggest enemy to a comedy character is staring back at them in the mirror.
That's so interesting that you said comedy characters never learn. They just keep coming back and making the same mistakes. And my husband recently really got into the show Silicon Valley. Have you seen that?
I haven't, no, but I've heard lots of good things about that, yeah.
You would understand it completely, because I got annoyed. I mean, it's got like 6 series or something. And I was like, look, I know exactly how these characters are going to react every time. And he's like laughing away, and I laughed away a little bit. But then I was like, it's just the same every single episode. And is it the success of these types of shows, is it that people really they kind of crave that same experience that means that character can't ever learn, I guess?
Yeah, I think there's a few things there. There's a sort of, but for the grace of God, go I, he's going to do that again. If you think about the Charlie Brown, the Peanuts cartoon, there's this running gag that just never gets old. Honestly, Charlie, I'm not going to take the ball away this time. I'm going to leave it there. You can kick the ball. And of course, Lucy takes it away at the last moment. It's every time. And it's sort of, yes, you can look at that from a logical point of view and say, well, he should just not try kicking the ball again, But that's the sort of thing, that's part of the lack of self-awareness. It's like, I can show that as a sort of optimism of a person. They just can't believe that anyone would be so mean, that, they have such faith in humanity that they're going to keep trying to do this. And every time it then becomes like you as a comedy writer, you have to find a new way of putting that character in a difficult situation. There's a great British TV comedy writer, Dennis Norden. He described every joke, he said, is a momentary removal of a sympathy. And so when you see that person walk into a lamppost or fall flat on their backside or do the thing that they keep doing, you sort of laugh at them. But it's momentary because, you kind of feel, yeah, I know what that's like.
Yeah, and I was thinking as you were talking about Dilbert, the cartoon, and also The Office, the show The Office that we had here in the UK and also in the US. And again, it's very normal situations and we recognise the working culture, and it's funny because we recognise those characters and those characters, the bad manager. It's kind of a cliche, isn't it? So how do we avoid cliches in comedy?
Yes. That's a very good question. 9 times out of 10, or a lot of times, we don't. But it's the same as avoiding cliches in any form, really. You coming back to what I've already spoken about, in a sense, you're bringing your self-awareness to something. So, I suppose cliches are actually that are very good at the starting point when you're creating a comedy show, or when it works with drama. What is this show about? It's about a fish out of water. I suppose the answer is that you put your cliches into the theme of what something's about, because cliches are cliches because they are kind of shortcuts to truth, so that everybody gets that straight away. So someone like Arthur Dent in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, he's a fish out of water. He's out of his depth. And then so you've got a story that's as original and startling almost as the Hitchhiker's Guide, but you still got these kind of comedy characters. So it's the places that you put your characters in. So yes, they're doing the same things over and over, but you avoid cliche because you keep coming back to the character, as I keep doing, talking to you now.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So your Barry Goldman books, you mentioned they're loosely autobiographical in that they are about a stand-up comedian and sort of how his life developed. So was that what came to you when you wanted to write the novel? That's obviously a very different approach to the Richard Osman Thursday Murder Club, a load of retirees in a retirement home. Did you feel like there was just too much comedy in your own life not to put that on the page?
Well, yes, and that was partly, I put that down to my lack of experience. And I think, and again, this is quite a common thing that I find with people when they're starting out. The first thing that people often want to write in comedy is their story. And the reason for this is quite valid, because the sort of 2 pieces of advice you hear over and over again for writers are, number 1 is write what you know. And number 2 is write in your own voice. So these are phrases that are bandied about, but they need some careful examination, because just because this thing happened to you doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be the best person to write about it. And I think writing what you don't know is as important, I think, finding out stuff. You find out new stuff. You don't know a huge amount, but you know just enough more than the person who's going to read your book to be like 1 step ahead of them. So the next point is about writing in your voice. Well, this is my story, so it's going to be my voice. Again, I don't think that's really what one's voice is. I think you find your voice just by writing and trying new things all the time. And it's the sum of everything that you've ever done up to the point that you start writing. And so I think it's more important to give yourself permission to lie. And I think now I'm just writing book 3, the last in the Barry Goldman trilogy, and compared to the first one, it's just there's nothing in book 3 that's really autobiographical. Little episodes here or there, but the first book was much more about me. And I think that was just me getting that first novel out of the way so that I could become a novelist, And I think a piece of advice I give to people is, if you're thinking, I'm going to write my story, that's my first novel, maybe just park that for a moment and maybe just try and come up with a different thing. You won't be so emotionally attached to it, and you may be able to look at it look at the bigger picture rather than be kind of stuck inside it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where you go. I was thinking then of David Baddiel, who was originally very much a comedy writer. And then over the years, I mean, obviously he still does some comedy, but over the years, his books have become very serious and tackling some really big topics. And he's really changed as a writer over the decades that I've certainly been reading him. And I think that's important too, isn't it? It's not like you're necessarily only ever going to write comedy books. And I think your covers, for example, the cover branding makes it very clear what kind of book people can expect.
Yes, I think that's true. I mean, I've been writing for 40 odd years now. David's been writing for almost as long, probably 30 years. And in fact, it's a sort of parallel almost, in that I was doing stand-up before him, and I was the Jewish comedy stand-up at that time, and then as I stopped and he took over, and that became his role. And then he went on and he did a lot of this stuff about football and things. Each new project brings new things, and we get older and we have different experiences. But yes, I mean, I think there is a bit of a problem with writing a comic novel. I do listen to a lot of podcasts about self-publishing, and people do attach a lot of importance to the cover. And it's fine if you're writing, like Richard Osman, you're writing a murder mystery, and you look at the cover of Richard Osman's book and it looks like all the other covers of all the murder mysteries. It just happens to be funny as well. Likewise, you look at Emily Henry, American romance novelist as well. You look at her covers and they're very similar to the sorts of covers of romance novels, but hers happen to be funny as well. But a comic novel, I mean, I can't make a cover that's like Bridget Jones because it's not a romance, or I can't do a cover like Hitchhiker's Guide. It's not science fiction. So yes, I did try with the novels. I did try to get something that conveys humour without having the luxury of being able to say, oh, and it's in this, you'll find it in this shelf in the library or at the bookshop.
No, it is difficult. As you say, it's more of a crossover in terms of where it fits. And I understand the difficulty in marketing that. But I did also just want to touch on something that a lot of people are very scared about in this culture, is this sort of cancel culture, outrage. And there are certainly some comics on Netflix. And right now, as we're recording the Edinburgh Festival, people get offended and they can put bad reviews or they can tear people down on social media. And I was thinking even how publishers have rewritten Roald Dahl, which was my childhood comedy, and how dated things are. Like, I was thinking about how Benny Hill, I mean, you could not have a Benny Hill film on TV anymore. I mean, it's just really offensive. So how do we tackle this fear with humour? Because it often does skirt the line of what's accessible.
I will answer that with regard to the specifics of the moment and cancel culture and woke and all these handy words of the moment. But I would like to go to a more important point, which I think obscures this, which I think a lot of people fear writing comedy. And interestingly, I find certainly when people come to me as writers wanting to do stuff, it's almost invariably women. Because men just think, oh, I'm going to write comedy and that's how it is. But women will write to me and say, I want to write comedy, but I'm not sure that I'm funny enough. And actually, there is this sort of a problem that people are worried that, like you say, you'll get a bad review or whatever. And that does happen. And also it is true that comedy, unlike drama, is like you were saying with your husband, he's laughing there and you're getting annoyed, And if you watch a drama and you don't like it, you just go, oh, I didn't like that. You watch a comedy show and you don't like it, you get really angry. How could they think that's funny? Like you were saying earlier, that's not I don't find that funny. How can anyone else find it funny? And so that you will get that, I'm afraid, but actually, people need to overcome that fear, because the worst thing, I think, with comedy, and I certainly found this with my first novel, is indifference, much more than hostility. People, you think, oh, I'm a bit worried someone might take offense at this. Well, just be grateful that someone's even actually got round to reading it, So that's the first thing I would say about that. But yes, you do have to have a little bit of a thick skin, I think, to be able to do comedy. But if you think you're funny, just try it and send it out to people and see what people say. Someone will find it funny. Not everyone. And so the people who don't find it funny say, oh, I didn't find that funny. But some people will. And so that's something that I really would encourage people, because it is definitely something. It does frustrate me sometimes. I see very good, very funny writers who are held back by that thing of, well, some people won't find it funny. I'm a bit nervous about putting it out there. Well, that's fine. That's part of being a writer, is being nervous about what you put out there. But and I think that is just much more important. I think it's quite hard to get cancelled nowadays. I wouldn't worry about that. And certainly Roald Dahl and Benny Hill, they're not around to worry about it anymore. That's somebody else's problem, not your problem. Just write what you can and write what you want to do, because you love writing and you want to be a better writer. That's always, for me, is the number one key thing.
And it's interesting thinking about dated language, and it doesn't relate to getting cancelled, but when I rewrote my first novel, Stone of Fire, after more than a decade, I found conversation in there that I just would not write anymore, terms that have really dated in terms of just technology and stuff. And so I rewrote those and was very happy that as a self-published author, you can just rewrite and upload new files. So that is a possibility.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's been something that I've had to revisit, because the first song that I wrote for Horrible Histories was a song about the 4 King Georges, George 1, 2, 3 and 4. And it's still a very popular song and people go to that song. But there are lines in that song now that I wouldn't, there's no way that I would write lines like that now. But that was like 2008, so it's not like a kind of eons away. And I think there have definitely been very big changes in language. And I think if you are able to go back, and this is one of the great things, as you say, about self-publishing. And in fact, there were a couple of things in the first Barry book that after I'd published it the first time, somebody read a couple of things and said, oh, that's a bit dodgy, even though it was, from a sympathetic point of view, it still potentially came across as something that people might be upset by it. And I was able to, like you say, just go into the document, change it and put it back again in 72 hours rather than 8 months or whatever.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking that I think Dickens republished one of his stories after some feedback for something that was taken as much more offensive. So I think this is not a new thing in that people changing what they've written. But yeah, I hope, like what you've said, helps people just put stuff out there. And I like that you mentioned obscurity, because this is so true. And when we see comics cancelled or people taken down on social media, they are often very, very famous. And the reality is most of us, as you say, put our books out and nobody even notices.
Yeah. Well, I mean, an interesting one is, there's a couple of comedians, notably Ricky Gervais and Dave Chappelle,
Ricky Gervais,
who their job, they think, is to offend, and they do that job really well. People get offended and they say, look at what Ricky Gervais has just done. And the algorithm, which doesn't understand divisiveness or woke cancel culture, says, oh, so twice as many people are telling me to show this Ricky Gervais thing. This must be really popular. And so for people who like Ricky Gervais and other people, that it actually helps them, because the algorithm doesn't do that politics. It's just the algorithm.
Yeah. It is interesting. And I mean, there'll be people who have different attitudes listening. And I think that's where I was coming from in terms of the question around comedy, because obviously Ricky Gervais is really, and Dave Chappelle are really extreme on some of these things. And I've got to admit, like on the Netflix specials for both of them, I did go and have a look because they got so much flack. I was like, how? And of course, some of it really is offensive, but much of it was very, very funny. So I think that's the other thing, isn't it? It's almost like, can we laugh at some things and not others? And that's partly what humour is. There is such a fine line between funny and offensive.
To come back to your Dickens example, the example I know, which might be the one you're thinking of, is certainly when Oliver Twist came out, there was a lot of people complained about Fagin being an anti-Semitic character. And his response, Dickens' response in the next book he had, I think it's Our Mutual Friend, he has this character called Mr. Ria, who's this nice, lovely Jewish man. And it's almost like, I wish you'd just apologized for Fagin and moved on, but this character was almost like an overcompensation of, oh, Mr. Ria is a lovely man, he's kindly eyes, he's a generous moneylender, and he's a wonderful person. You just think, oh, come on, Dickens, this isn't a Dickensian character, you know. So
being a writer has always been a struggle, for sure. Now, we're almost out of time, but I wanted to come to one of your other short books called Ready, Steady, Joke: Why Hard Times Are the Best Times to Build Your Writing Career. And I love that attitude, as obviously you mentioned COVID before, which was very tough for live performances, but there are always challenges and always difficulties. But what are some of your tips for finding opportunities and keeping a positive mindset?
Well, I mean, the first thing that I would say in terms of keeping a positive mindset is this thing of doing it because you want to do it, because you want to become a better writer. Try not to think about, I am going to write the great comic novel of the 21st century or whatever. Just, I want to get better. I love writing. I love comedy. I want to get better for the sake of it. There are actually to get on in TV and radio, and it's got harder over the years, just as it's got harder in every section of TV and movies and whatever. It's just harder and harder to sell stuff nowadays. But there are actual ways in British and American TV, is if you can write jokes, or if you can, you can, some people can do it instinctively, but you can learn how to write jokes. You can learn how to write topical jokes, and you've got these shows on US TV, daily shows, and then you've got topical shows on the BBC in Britain as well. And these shows just eat up loads and loads and loads of material. And they're always looking for new writers. And if you can get a credit on a show like that, and you start to get to know TV producers and people, and I think just networking generally is a good thing to do, because you find out what else is going on in the world of TV and radio, and someone else, you might meet another producer who likes your sense of humor. Again, coming back to this, humor is subjective. You know, you meet a producer who's on your humor wavelength, and they'll try and get your projects made. So that's getting to know people within that industry. It's harder in books because it is much more of a kind of, I suppose the publishing world is more of a closed shop, but within self-publishing, there's a great community. Getting to know other people in the community is an important thing. But the other thing I'd say is, people often say, if you want to know how to write a novel, you should learn to write short stories, which is good advice, I think. But if you want to write comedy, it's worth trying to learn how to write comedy sketches, like sort of 2 or 3 minute self-contained sketches like they have on Saturday Night Live, like Key and Peele, and like in Britain, shows like, well, there was Little Britain, Big Train was a great show. Sketches are great because sketches are to sitcom what the short story is to the novel. They're like little self-contained. It's like a single chapter that's a self-contained story, and it uses all the elements that you will use in your writing your novel. It uses character, world, goal, objects, dialogue, twists, and punchline, whatever the punchline might be. So that's a really good thing to do. But don't just think, oh, I'm going to do this now. Just plan long term. Think about the future. Above all, try and become a better writer.
And I was thinking then of the comedic aspects within self-publishing as well. And just trying to keep a positive mindset around some of the challenges we have, not just the writing side, obviously the publishing and the marketing and the changes going on. I mean, it's a sitcom all of its own, isn't it, really?
Yes. I mean, although without the laughs, I've been finding, I think.
Oh, I don't know. In terms of cliches, I know you were at London Book Fair this year, and I've been going to London Book Fair for, a decade. I obviously missed the COVID years when it wasn't on, but I go to London Book Fair and I can just see the cliches coming.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think having a positive attitude wherever you are in your writing journey can be super helpful, and laughing with other author friends is often the antidote, perhaps.
Yeah. And I just want to say before we go, the difference between being in the world of like constant rejection of writing for TV and stuff, and then the world where anybody can do anything of self-publishing. Yes, it's a bit scary, but from a positive point of view, I do think that self-publishing, and I'm not just saying this, Joe, but I think your podcast in particular is just a fantastic resource. There's just so much. I think I've learned more from listening to your show, really, about how to really be a novelist, rather than, and it doesn't end once you say type the end. That's just the beginning, really, and to be out there and to be marketing. And yes, you don't have all the sort of machine of the industry behind you, but you have control over your own work, and that's just a really energizing thing, I find.
Oh, fantastic. So where can people find you and your books and everything you do online?
Well, I've just started a new podcast. I used to do a podcast called Sitcom Geeks, and so the clue was in the title, and we did about 200 episodes, but we stopped because nobody was making sitcoms anymore, and also we were doing other things. So I've now got a more general podcast called A Write Funny Podcast, as in WRITE. And then the book, How to Write a Funny Novel, will be out end of September. You can find out all about these things at my website, which is davecohen.org.uk.
Well, thanks so much for your time, Dave. That was great.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I hope you found the discussion with Dave interesting, and that you might find ways to lighten your work with a laugh now and then, even if you don't write comedy. As ever, I love to hear your thoughts about the interview or about anything I talk about in the introduction. Let me know if you find some interesting use cases for Google Notebook LM. I am playing with it every day right now. I think it's fascinating. Please leave a comment on the podcast show notes at thecreativepenn.com or on the YouTube channel. Message me on X at thecreativepenn or email me, joanna@thecreativepenn.com. Send me pictures of where you're listening. Next Monday, I'm talking about author mindset, writing and marketing nonfiction with Ariel Curry. And remember, my Kickstarter for Blood Vintage runs 1st to the 15th of October 2024. Head on over for a look if you're interested. jfpenn.com/Blood Vintage. In the meantime, happy writing, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. You can find the backlist episodes and show notes at thecreativepenn.com/podcast. And you can get your free author blueprint at thecreativepenn.com/blueprint. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on Facebook and X at The Creative Penn, or on Instagram and Facebook at JFPennAuthor. Happy writing, and I'll see you next time.